With over 60% of the world's uncultivated arable land, Africa should not be importing most of its grain, right? 10 years ago, a World Bank report said Africa's farmers can potentially grow enough food to feed the continent and avert future food crises. Yet today, that potential is still far from being reached. In fact, the UN is warning that a devastating drought in the Horn of Africa could worsen as a fifth consecutive rainy season is predicted to fail. Now, that leaves 22 million people at risk of starvation, even in some agricultural hubs. DW correspondent Edith Kimani visited farmers in Kenya's breadbasket to see how they're coping with the emerging shocks.
This was supposed to be a bumper harvest for Jonathan Kibet, but things could not have gone worse for the Kenyan farmer. First, the rains failed to come in March, then an infestation of armyworms attacked his crop, and most recently, a violent storm flattened his entire harvest.
We'll not be having anything to eat, because if this farm was producing, let's say, 15 to 18 bags, now I'm projecting maybe I'll get 3 to 5 bags. Now you see that gap, a gap of around 10 bags. That one will be a serious problem.
Kenya ranks as one of the countries with the highest food insecurity in the world. As a rain-fed economy, the country relies almost entirely on produce from small-scale farmers like Jonathan, who simply can't keep up.
We have been using an ancient mode of doing farming. We have not gotten maybe more enlightenment, or now we can do other manageable ways of farming.
On a neighboring farm, Samson Talam gets to tilling his land. The high cost of fuel has meant he can no longer afford to hire a tractor. It's a lot of work with little return. He takes me to see this year's harvest. It's not promising.
Indian beans. These are beans. Another ones are there. There's another box there. This is the only one I've harvested right now for this year.
The 65-year-old is now at risk of poverty, as even his dairy business is threatened by the scarce animal feed. The impact of what's happening on the farms can already be felt in informal settlements right here in the city. The price of maize flour, which is a staple in the country, is now retailing for close to $2. But for a population living in extreme poverty, that can feel like a death sentence. And that was made evident in this viral video, showing a shopper's visceral reaction at a supermarket to the increased food prices. On the streets, the view is similar.
You can't expect someone earning $1 a day to buy maize flour for $2. Children here are going to school hungry. We can't even feed them breakfast.
Food security expert Anne Miner has been critical of African governments' inability to create crop and diet diversity. Her suggestion: focus on climate-resilient and nature-driven farming.
We need to harness resources. Already we have several huge dams that have been built, but also putting money in investing in small irrigation facilities, conservation of water, building of water pans would make a huge difference in terms of food production in Kenya.
Back in the Rift Valley, Jonathan is already rolling out his next plans. Sorghum, a more drought-resistant crop with a ready market. He's hopeful he'll bounce back when the rains come.
Now, on the other side of the continent, seeking crop alternatives could also be a way forward as wheat remains in short supply. Senegal buys half of its wheat from Russia and 6% from Ukraine, but the ongoing war has hampered those imports and sent prices up. It's prompted a push in the West African nation for the adoption of more locally sourced cereals.
In this region of western Senegal, most farmers cultivate millet, a local high-protein grain eaten for breakfast and supper. Traditionally, farmers have kept the grain for domestic use, but now there is a push to expand production in a way that will benefit local economies and reduce reliance on wheat. Regional agricultural associations and a local NGO are providing training and equipment to farmers like Ngagne Sarr. They have also encouraged him to switch to organic farming.
I'm seeing all the advantages. Before we were using chemical fertilizers, but it's expensive. And now I also know that it's toxic. With the new method, there are higher yields and fewer expenses. Organic fertilizers last longer in the ground. And even when you have two types of crops, it's efficient for both.
The improved yield has enabled Ngangni to better provide for his family. The millet sold by farmers like him is bought by bakeries and other businesses in the community, including by entrepreneurs such as Awa Diop. She is now using locally sourced millet and maize to make her fritters rather than imported wheat.
I couldn't go back. Clients have started to appreciate the millet fritters. It's what I'm known for. It's our tradition. Millet and maize are irreplaceable. It's also easier to digest than wheat flour.
But one big question is whether people in cities and other parts of Senegal would also be happy to switch from wheat to cereals such as millet. Many Senegalese prefer wheat baguettes of the type sold in this bakery. The government is encouraging bakers to use local cereals because as the price of wheat rises, so too do the subsidies that they pay. This bakery is making gradual changes, but convincing customers here remains a challenge.
I think there's still a lack of information. We're trying to sensitize people to say it's good for them. And every time we explain this, the consumption increases. When I started, it represented only 2 to 3% of the total sales. Today it's at 20%. My objective is to reach 50% of sales for bread made with local cereals.
Shifting away from wheat to decrease food dependency is something bakers are determined to do, even beyond Senegal. Representatives from 8 other countries in West Africa recently came to Dakar for the launch of a confederation of West African bakeries.
With the crisis in Ukraine, we thought there's a need to find alternative solutions. Today, bringing bakers from West Africa is a first here in Dakar. There's a need for synergy. We want West Africa to wake up. We want to make commercial exchanges. If I want banana flour for Senegal, I can import it from the Ivory Coast. And if an Ivorian wants millet flour, he will import it from Niger or Senegal. That's the purpose.
Whether the use of local cereals will reach its full potential remains to be seen. Eating habits are slow to change. The hope is that at some point, the country will be able to reduce its reliance on imported wheat.
Let's bring in Debisi Araba, who is a visiting research fellow at the Center for Environmental Policy at the Imperial College in London. Welcome to the program. Now, as we've just heard from our report from urban Dakar, people love their wheat baguette. Now, at a time when food security is under threat, should Africans consider adapting their tastes and opt for other available food crops?
Thank you very much, Tommy. Thank you for having me. Well, I mean, diets have evolved over time. Diets will always continue to evolve into the future. So the Senegalese who have acquired tastes of baguettes will alter their tastes into the future. So it's a moot question. It has to happen, and it will happen, whether or not it's forced on us externally or we demand it internally.
Considering Africa has so much arable land, why is the continent struggling to feed itself?
Oh, that's a complicated question. However, when we think about the myriad of challenges that it takes to be competitive globally in food and agriculture, which is, of course, a $10 trillion proposition, there are a few things that I think we're already doing well as a continent that we just need to double down on. The first thing is we need to bet on ourselves. No one can want a more prosperous Africa more than Africans themselves. An example is the Technologies for African Agriculture Transformation that has aligned science with public policy and private entrepreneurship, where you're bringing the very best of science from around the world into countries aligned with national priorities and getting entrepreneurs to grow food. The green shoots of success are beginning to show in Sudan and Ethiopia that in the next farming season will both be self-sufficient in wheat specifically. And so if we can extend these types of programs to other countries, we will start to see this mushrooming of prosperity across the continent. it's not one thing, it's a lot of things. Another aspect is finance. We need a lot of money to come into the agri-food sector. Last year, the IMF released $650 billion in special drawing rights to countries. Of that, 33 billion was allocated to African countries. Now, that 33 billion is less than what the US, Japan, China, and Germany individually received. So we need more innovative finance mechanisms to ensure that we have longer-term, lower-cost financing to back entrepreneurs. A lot of youth are coming into value chains. We need to be able to back them, especially those focused on market-creating innovations, these innovations that target non-consumption in value chains.
And on that note, what should African governments be pushing for on the global stage to be able to achieve this?
I think African countries, I started with betting on ourselves, and I think that's where I'd like to end. African countries and African economies need to bet on ourselves. We have to resolve to focus on making the right choices consistently. There needs to be an alignment in public policy, national priorities, private investment, supporting private entrepreneurship. You need this public sector-enabled, private sector-led transformation of the agri-food sector. If it happens, when it happens, we will see a truly prosperous Africa in terms of the agri-food sector.
Debisi Araba, policy specialist with a focus on environment and agriculture in Africa. Thank you for speaking to us.